Hello everyone, good evening. Those who are here and those who are there, those who are near here, those who are slightly further there. Thank you very much everyone joining me and everyone else, as you can see, on the teachings on understanding of afflictive emotions, which is a special chapter in the Abhidharma as a classic Buddhist text. So let's do the prayers, put some thoughts and aspirations to be able to have a good understanding. It's very difficult for people to know the afflictions, let alone overcoming them. They usually think of people and things people do. That's the problem. They don't see their own afflictions, let alone type of afflictions and how they influence each other, how they flood in us, how they just chain us, and how they just burn us, how they destroy us. People are very unaware of that. So this is a very pertinent part of Buddhist teachings. And so we're going to offer these prayers so that each of us will be able to have a good comprehension of destructive emotions and how to learn to tame them and recruit some wholesome, intelligent emotions, love and kindness and compassion and forgiveness and understanding and acceptance. All these are very intelligent emotions, and if we knew how to tame the negative ones, you will find they all are potential positives. There are not really negative emotions that are truly there, independently there. But unless we pray and we make aspiration, we are completely seized by them. We do not know how to turn them into good. And the enlightened one, the Buddha, the fully enlightened one, did succeed doing that, and that's why he's called enlightened one. An amazing, really, amazing discovery. People discover life on some places, they think it's great, but what if life itself is destroyed by afflictions? If we discover that, it would be much better. So to be able to prevent the affliction, destroying the life, is much more important discovering them than discovering more lives on different planets. Which is enormous. Anyway, let's do the prayer. Join your hands in the prayer, and in honoring the Buddha, his amazing enlightenment and his noble Sangha and unbroken transmission of the teachings that has kept and held these teachings and delivered to us in this century. In the Buddha Dharma Asanga enlightenment by virtue of Yevandala Ashare Buddha Vudu and the Buddha Dharma Asanga enlightenment by virtue of Yevandala Ashare Buddha Vudu and the Buddha Dharma Asanga enlightenment by virtue of Ashara Vada Udubi. May all beings have happiness and cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they know apart from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment, aversion of those near and far. May all beings have happiness and cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they know apart from happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment, aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May there be ever suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never run the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. According to the intelligence and predisposition of it, where the yajanda dharma agrelo come vego. Study and understanding of afflictive emotions. Of course, emotion general, but afflicted ones. If afflicted means those which are poisoned and obscured and cognitively wrong, and they're afflicted, so they're poisoned thoughts and emotions. And we looked at them many different ways, but tonight we're going to look at from the point of view of the typology of the negative emotions and how they are grouped together in the Abhidharma. I think it's for us it's sometimes very difficult to appreciate the grouping grouping of these various categories of afflictions because we do not really have what makes some to belong this group, other to that group, such as even to distinguish the 5 non-view afflictive emotions, such as desire, anger, pride, ignorance, and doubt. So when we look at that, we just know what they are, but then we do not know how one relates to each other. And it was discussed how they are discarded once you realize those 4 noble truths. If you realize the truths or the teachings, and you meditate through meditative realization, you are able to discard them in some sequence, because you only drop the gross ones first, but subtle ones, the afflicted 5 afflicted views are much harder to discard, because they're much subtle, they're much cognitive obscuration. So in Buddhism we call it 2 obscuration. One is afflictive obscuration, one is cognitive obscuration. So afflictive obscuration is just the gross afflictions such as anger. Whereas cognitive obscuration is you think you are real, you think you are permanent, you think the person who harmed you independently truly exists. So there is this, our knowledge that there is me is already an obscuration. There is really no us that independently exists. So therefore, all the cognitive obscuration are 5 afflicted views. The non-view afflictions are just gross desire, gross anger, and jealousy, and so on. So we saw those 2 groups right at the very beginning when they talk about the 10 fundamental obscurations. So, of course, then there is also more different kinds of, for instance, desire in the when you realize the truth of suffering. When you realize the truth of suffering, you know the desire is the. You don't know the desire is. Desiring pleasure is suffering. You don't realize that. But desiring pleasure is the suffering, for instance. Yet we desire the very pleasure that is suffering. Suffering meaning the desire, the pleasure that we seek is impermanent. It's largely controlled by factors outside yourself. And so what you're desiring may look desirable, but by the time it come into your possession, it may not be desirable, Why? Because the desirable thing is impermanent, and therefore, even though it is desirable then, but by the time when you get it, it is no longer desirable. Even though you did enjoy for a little while, the fact that you're enjoying undesirable, then it's already suffering, but we do not know undesirability of that there and then, for instance. So that's the kind of gross afflictions. But when you move to the truth of origin, that's when you don't realize the truth of suffering, that's what you do. But when you realize truth of suffering, which is realizing that truth of suffering is different from not realizing the truth of suffering. When you're not realizing the truth of suffering, you actually enjoy the suffering temporarily, enjoy something temporarily, like person who's drinking, they think they're having great time. He's actually ignorant. Then he's ignorant and he's desiring the undesirable, but he's temporarily, deludedly enjoying it. That's the truth of suffering, yeah? When he knows the true origin of the suffering, he realizes his own desiring it is the origin of his dissatisfaction. He will soon be dissatisfied with it. His desiring of it is the true origin of suffering. Yeah. So knowing its true origin of suffering and realizing true origin of suffering is 2 different categories. So what does this Abhidharma text does, which is very complex to go through each verse, is how the practitioners on the 15 stages of the realizing the 4 noble truths in 3 realms of existence, desire and formed and formless realms. So he categorized the difference between the desires of the beings in desire realms, realization, the truth of suffering, realization, the origin of suffering, realization of the cessation of suffering, and realization, the path following this, that ends the cessation of suffering. So the desire being's ability to discard for instance, the affliction of desire is distinct from that of those in form and formless realm. For instance, it talks about how the relationship between the afflictions, from confusion, from ignorance, arises doubt. From that arises wrong view. From that arises afflictive view of thinking I am. And then from that I am, one desires undesirables. Because every I am has it is. I want this. What you want is undesirable. But you don't know it, because you don't even know what you think you are is already mistaken, based on the wrong view, doubt, confusion. So all the subtle cognitive obscuration are the cushion that causes you to desire undesirable ones. And then when you don't get it, a person who knows he's desiring undesirable, when he doesn't get it, he will be happy. I'm glad I'm not wasting time. But deluded one, when he doesn't get the undesirable one, he get agitated. Then he get angry. So the anger comes from desire. Anger comes from desiring undesirable one. Even though temporarily they may look desirable and so on, but still it's the truth of suffering. But he doesn't know the truth of suffering. Only when he loses, then he thinks it's agitating. He doesn't realize that he's enjoying the thing itself is suffering. So temporary, because so that all temporary pleasures are suffering. And when that temporary pleasure becomes absent and then replaced by displeasure, then we think it's suffering. We think it's suffering. But actually, it was already suffering prior to that. So that's why you can see how the afflictions are multi-layered. It's like onion, It looks there is something, but there is nothing. They're just layers of afflictions that's enwrapping. And that's why it uses the enwrapment, 10 enwrapment, This, in the typology of affliction, they call 10 enwrapments or 10 fetters. I think fetters is probably, fetters or chains. But word kunti in Tibetan means completely wrapped up. Completely wrapped up. You couldn't be unwrapped. He's completely wrapped. You don't know whether you and that's wrap is two different things. You're completely wrapped up in that. So that 10 enwrapment or 10 fetters, for instance, are desiring pleasure, which desiring pleasure, and it's already an enwrapment, but we don't know. We are chained by this seeking pleasure, and then clinging to existence. The second fetter is clinging to existence. Existence of wanting to be. Say you have a position, and you really enjoy the position. You blatantly say, I like my position or something. And all deluded people do, otherwise they wouldn't be holding the position. They deliberately apply to get the position. And so first they desire the position, and then they're clinging to it. So not only he's the fetter, now he's clinging to the fetter. So that's wrapping number 2. And then he has aversion. His aversion is all to do with his attachment to the position, to the pleasure. If you see an animal who's enjoying some food or something, as soon as someone comes near, they get aversion. They express aversion because they're enjoying the eat food. And so the desire causes aversion. So that's the third. Aversion is the third enwrapment. That enwrapment of aversion is not independent. It's to do with the clinging to the taste. Clinging to the taste, and clinging to the taste is because he wanted to enjoy the taste. He enjoyed the taste. He's clinging to the taste, and when slight obstacle comes, he develops aversion. So these are the third enwrapment, and the fourth is conceit. And fifth one is wrong view. There's one thing that's truly existing, that's truly mine and truly real and truly permanent and constant cause of pleasure. He doesn't know he's already agitated concerning that. he's already agitated. He's already angry. He doesn't know that it's actually that. He had the wrong view. The thing what he has is truly existing. He thinks this is permanent. So then, fifth enwrapment is the wrong view. We had the wrong view of eternalistic and nihilistic, all those views. Either of the five wrong view will do. And then the sixth enwrapment is called adherence to certain rituals and ceremonies as superior way of doing. So one becomes very attached to certain ways of doing things. It doesn't have to be religious rites. It's just certain way of doing things. You think that's the only way. If there's any other way of doing it, you just can't do it because you're so framed up in your way of doing. You can't see any other way of doing it, even though it's completely doable. But so that because of that, there's this arrogance, this wrong view concerning what we call certain rites or rituals or ceremonies. So that's the sixth enwrapment. The seventh enwrapment is doubt. So then, of course, sooner or later, because it's based on wrong view, you will starting doubt. Even though the doubt is, doubt could be two. Yeah, one is leaning onto the fact, one is leaning over the opposite of the fact. So doubt could be pretty, but doubt makes the person to waste a lot of time, and therefore not move on, do what he had to do. He should do. It will prevent him from making decision. And then because of this, then the seventh one is that's the seventh one. The seventh one is envy, jealousy. Then it's anyone else does that, anyone else has that position, then he's jealous. So all of these afflictions are interdependent, mutually inclusive, and they're enwrapped in the sense. And then one has also miserliness. The ninth one is miserliness. Ninth fetter is the miserliness, and the 10th is ignorance. So what it does is it groups afflictions, how they are all interdependent to each other. And as here talking about sequence of how they arise, not necessarily these 10 fetters. Firstly, because those 10 root affliction we discussed as fairly fundamental, they have most of them. The five afflicted views are what they call universals. Meaning everybody has them. And we don't even notice, because we are in a desire realm, we don't even notice the problems. And even those beings in the form and formless realm, they also host those wrong views. But depending to the individual's characteristic, some of the afflictive emotions are more dominant in some people. Some people are very desire-dominated person, others a very anger-dominated person, others maybe pride, or depending to, so each of the persons are not necessarily always the person's desire-dominated. There may be times his really desire is the most dominant of all the five afflictions. And yet the universal bed or foundation that supports is the five afflicted views. Five afflicted views that actually supports the foundation. For instance, from ignorance, then doubt arises, and then from that develop wrong view. All of these unconscious. All of this, when you develop ignorance, you don't think I'm ignorant. And when you doubt, you don't think it's wrong. And you have the wrong view, but you don't think it's the wrong view. So these are all unconscious consciousnesses. And that's why I call afflicted. When you're discarding means you consciously make sure that you do not pick these emotions and therefore have the fitness not to become afflicted by them. And why all the afflictions are difficult to drop until you realize the path of seeing is we have the afflicted view of self, afflicted view of grasping to the aggregates as self. And so that is like the kind of a foundation that actually universal, they call universal. These kind of universal afflictions, holding, seizing, recognizing aggregates. This is aggregates is firstly. All the aggregates are actually very, very transient, very, very insignificant. If you just disassemble the aggregates from your body or the heart, whatever it is, there isn't anything significantly I in any of them. But yet one is not seeing that. One sees this kind of monolithic, independently existing thing, that innately you don't even question. And not only that, one thinks one is permanent, even though it's impermanent. Even the aggregate itself is impermanent. But one thing is permanent and truly existing. So all of these things gives rise to extreme view of eternalistically thinking, I am permanent, I'm real. From that, one is clinging to various ways or rules or rituals or of conduct, saying this conduct is superior, our conduct is superior, your conduct is not superior. So therefore one becomes very judgmental and righteous about one's conduct being right because it's our right, our conduct. And therefore we think our view is superior. They actually blatantly say we are right, they are the wrong. The very few people say they are right, we are wrong. Even if others are right, we deny it. That's there. And from that, then we become attached to our view, assuming it is correct, it is superior, and our rituals, our conduct being best, and so on. And then we develop pride. You can see how the sequence of all the affliction give one rise to another, and then if there's any kind of any competition, anyone else who has this, then there's aversion and competitiveness, and we have contempt towards other people's views, and this is the order. This is the sequence. Sequence. How these afflictive emotions enwraps, fetters. It's not someone else put the chain around your leg, but we unconsciously wrap up ourselves, like the silkworm. The silkworm is wrapped up by its own saliva and get imprisoned its own cocoon and dies there. And sentient beings are no different. So not only that, then that those affliction has near and distant causes. They are not because remember, it's very good to know the afflictions are not independent, inherently existing nature of person. They are interdependently produced. Their production, every production for a piece of pot has water, clay, the string, and the wheel, and the potter's effort, isn't it? So therefore, the pot is totally non-pot, made out of non-pot. Likewise, your afflictions do not independently exist, but your afflictions have near and distant causes, such as objects. So when you're near someone you desire or something you desire, you quickly get really craving for it, and that much more you get agitated. You have a fight because you want something and you didn't get it, and like that. But if you don't have the thing that you like near you, it can't make you. So therefore, often we are cause. There are objective cause, near cause, and distant cause, remote causes. But if we are able to drop the near cause of habits of affliction, such as desire, if we see the object that we usually desire as undesirable, impermanent, and truth of suffering and truth of origin, because we see that is a suffering by nature to desire it, sooner or later it's a suffering, and doesn't mean that you as soon as you know that something is by nature suffering, it makes you feel very cautious to not delve into it. So it almost hastens you from desiring the undesirable, because you're able to hasten or pause or maybe even totally restrain from desiring. When you can restrain the desiring, the suffering is not produced, because cause of the suffering, true origin of suffering, is been apprehended and stopped. But usually people don't. When they like something, when they desire something, they jump into it without remembering it is truth of suffering, and then they craving for it then cause the very origination. Remember the cause, and then an origin, and then the perfect origin, and then the production. And as soon as something gets produced, it's impermanent. It's no longer there. And then there's impermanence. So the thing that you enjoyed is no longer there. And so you are now ready to be miserable or disappointed, for instance. So therefore, affliction arises due to object, distant and near causes and condition. When all these things come together, complete, and not being able to abandon any of the near and distant causes of the afflictions, then you become completely enwrapped into that. And what is the near cause of the affliction is inappropriate attention. One is not aware that object is empty of true existence, or let alone desirability. One should see the undesirability thing as undesirable, impure as impure, impermanent as impermanent. If you have that, that's called appropriate attention. So the practitioners who have the truth of path, practice of meditation, whether they have yet path of seeing realization or not, at least they have the appropriate attention to exercise restraint. Exercise restraint because they have the power of forbearance. They say, no, this is not good as it looks. It isn't. So then you are able to have the knowledge of the truth of suffering, and you have the ability to forbear and not let. But most people do not have the truth of seeing, and because of that, the inappropriate attention, what we call attention deficit, basically. But in Buddhism, we call sumi yije. Sumi yije means inappropriate attention. It's not deficit of attention. It's inappropriate attention. Very beautiful. Inappropriate attention. It's not deficit. It's inappropriate attention insofar as failing to see what they all are. They don't see the undesirability, impure and unsubstantial and hollow and meaninglessness of that. They don't have that. So instead of abandoning the near and distant causes as well as the inappropriate attention, one jumps into it through the power of the grip of the affliction that kills one's sensibility. And so, like we talked last week, when we talk about according to the groups of floods, the four floods, those four floods of clinging to existing, wrong view, ignorance, and desire. So when we talk about four floods, those four out of the 10 enwrapment are called four floods. Four floods, And then they also called four knots. There's another group is called four knots. knots, of course, like a string or thread that is knotted, like that we become completely knotted, and emotionally and physically these emotions knot us up, and that is first knot is covetousness. Covetousness is not only one desires, but one wish to get what other people have. One doesn't have. One may have more. One may have 10 of those. Other has just 2. One is not content with the 10 that we have, but we want the 2 that others have. That's called covetousness. Covetous doesn't mean that covetousness is different from desiring. And covetous means that what other people have, you must have, even though you already have. So basically greed, yeah. So covetousness is called knot because it knots you so much, it almost, it completely screws you up, basically. And then you develop the second knot, that is ill will. Because if you have 10 pieces, others have only 2, but you want those both out of knot of covetousness, and then you have the wrong view, thinking they should never have it, you should have it. And so this self-grasping, the grasping to the self-importance, why I should have it, and see no importance that others should have it. So this wrong view, and as a result of that, one is again attached to the dogmatic views, dogmatic religious views or non-religious, whatever views, school of thought view that you might have. You become very dogmatic and very, very rigid, and you're not no room for relaxation, no room for a flexible way of interpreting things. For those in the desire realm, and then the afflicted state, most of the gross afflictions are all together affecting the mind of the person. So these afflictions do not work in isolation. They all work in isolation like a team, so to speak. We have no chance to wake up because they are so overwhelming forces. They just attack you from all directions, so to speak. The desire realm beings got very little, unless they have lots of meditation, discipline, and they have developed lots of accumulation, merit, and wisdom through the path of accumulation. So when you look at the wholesome, any of the wholesome wholesome emotions, such as faith, such as right view, such as kindness, such as non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-ignorance, when you have these, then only you can part and you can separate those afflictions, and they cannot have a grip on you. And they don't have the 10 enwrapment. The 10 enwrapment doesn't quite hold the grip on you. Whereas the form and formless realm beings, their problem is a very different one. They don't have the gross affliction like the 10 fetters, but they have this more what you call the contamination of thinking how idle their life is. Idle their status of this formless realm is, because they have a huge meditative state of experiences, and their sense of contentment or their sense of superiority of their existence. They don't have as a gross desire that we might have, because they don't have like the formless realm doesn't have the gross desire to things they see, because they themselves have no form, so they cannot desire other forms, So therefore they have lesser kind of gross affliction, but they have this superiority complex. of them being perfect. And so even in the ordinary world, sometimes we could reach to a certain place. Oh, I'm so fortunate. I got everything. I'm genius. Oh, I'm good. so this sense of being near perfect, sense of being near perfect. You can see. So occasionally, if your mind reaches that, that's exactly that talking about the wrong view of superiority of complex of you having reached certain perfect state. So the contaminants in their form and formless realms are much subtle, you know. Then there are certain afflictions that are neutral. They don't have a strong sting on you. They are neutral in the sense because your level of desire has been somewhat thwarted, and you don't have any desire, and so either you have it or you don't have it. There is kind of emotion, neutral emotion. So there is a kind of dispassion towards object. You might think they are desirable, but deep down you know you have indifference. You know, no, I like it, but I don't like it. I don't need it. Type of thing. You know, you have this. You can see that there's one side of mind you think that you do, but you basically have actually no burning desire for it. You actually have a very equanimous kind of neutrality towards that, because you have now appropriate attention to control desire, to control to see the undesirability when it's undesirable. You know that the undesirable. Because of that, you have appropriate attention. So if you get it, there's no hide about it. If you lose it, there's no loss about it. And also you have no great necessary attempt that you should pursue very hard to get it. You know? So that kind of neutral state is not enjoyable, I suppose, but nevertheless, quite a lot of practitioners reach that kind of level of dispassion towards this or that, and some kind of renunciation on one level, renunciation from one level, but at the same time you become very alone and lonely because there's very few people that can relate to that. But yet you have reached that level. So quite a lot of yogis go through the neutral state of they even try. You know, like Shantideva says, let me act like a log, that you have neutral feeling towards this, neither to attach towards nor aversion towards it. You have neither attachment nor aversion, so you have this kind of equanimous level. So, of course, you can't say it's a contamination from the point of a lack of desire to one and aversion to another. Yeah. But whether it's a contaminant, it's because it doesn't have the gross contaminant of desire and aversion, but at the same time, it is ignorant. It still is ignorant that is not an ideal state of reality. And so, therefore, root of affliction is still untouched. The gross affliction, gross affliction of desire and anger, maybe remedied, but that it can't avoid being in the state of a kind of a neutrality, because ignorance is very, very subtle, and it is not easily remediable. So, for instance, I may give an analogy of a person who is taught to do deity yoga meditation, and then first he struggles to do the sadhana and meditate, and can hardly see himself as the deity and so on, and then later on he succeeds for a while. Then his vision and visualization and of the deity is so clear that he actually sees himself as a deity, and then he becomes really And when it comes to about his everyday conventional life, about that, he doesn't have any strong feeling for this or against that, because he's been able to reach that kind of neutral state of mind through the practice of deity yoga, and he becomes somewhat complacent, thinking that's his realization. Yeah, but he doesn't know that realization isn't something he should grasp. And even that he should realize has to be remedied by emptiness of it. But he's nowhere near seeing the emptiness, because he's ignorant of the need of the emptiness of the deity. He thinks that seeing the deity is amazing. He thinks that should be written in his biography and things like that, as a great spiritual feat, achievement, and so on. But actually realize the purpose of the deity is to realize emptiness of self, and not to grasp on the achievement of something. Because attachment to something is already attachment to something, whether it's something is self or other, it doesn't matter. So what we're talking about is that when individual practitioner develop on the path, their gross problems are resolved, subtle problems still manifest. So this is exactly what the clinging is. That one is clinging. One clings to the status that you have achieved too as real. There's nothing wrong in doing that for a while, but in the long run, one needs to know that too has to be remedied by non-attachment. So one become attached to the result. Attachment to the result is not the result. It's a non-attachment even to the result. Is what one needs to realize. So the views, floods, and those four floods we were talking about. Those views are taught separately because they are sharply defined. The views are much more sharp distinction, and because view is said to be a contaminant because those anesthetics are not compatible with those that posited as samsara. So there's a very big difference between the floods, between the ordinary things that we think we are we should be free, we should be able to ford the floods of attachment, but view, those afflicted views are much harder because of the subtleness of that. All those previously explained gross afflictions plus ignorance are appropriators of those wrong views. So the ignorance is basically the universal. It's the kind of it's the blueprint of everything, and so it's completely mixed with the samsara, mixed with everything, and it's almost very difficult to separate that. And as one's meditation improves, going through the higher level, then they become much more easy to recognize. Like people who class the wolves see many types of wool in the bile of a wool, But ordinary people say there's just the wool, and they don't know how to class the wolves. Likewise, person who meditate a lot, all these sub-classifications, the afflictions become much more distinguishable one from the another. So therefore, the negative tendencies are so subtle, and because of they are subtle and related with one's attainment, because attainment themselves also are somewhat afflictions until you develop non-attachment to them. So if you're attached to the attainments, attachment can impede you, and you become complacent. I don't think we are having that problem just yet. But of course, this talking about practitioners who make progress, then they become much more. Some people are so worried of a few things. When we look at it, they have no idea where we are. They're worried about that problem. We don't have nowhere near it, but they're talking about those problems. We're talking about subtle contaminations that one needs to learn. There are said to be 5 types of fetters, that which includes ties that bind, negative tendencies, branch affliction, and entanglements. So these are talking about the fetters are subclassified as bondage and negative tendencies, and then secondary afflictions, and then the entanglements. Yeah, I think we went through those. In any way, so when we're talking about the subjective awareness of the afflictions and what the grip they have to us, and what kind of freedom from the fetters we have, or awareness of how fetterness of the fetters are to us, then we become much more cognizant of various subclasses of the afflictions from which we need to be cautious, with which we need to be cautious. The fetters are called fetters because they obscures you from perfect knowledge of equanimity, or seeing the suchness of things, seeing the truth of the path, truth of the cessation, truth of the value of the 3 jewels, and so on. So they chain us. They imprison us from being able to reach closer to realizing this. And this is why sometimes they call poison of samadhi. Poison of samadhi, when your meditation takes you to certain levels of might say even some kind of physical pliancy, or maybe even bliss, and then no desire and no craving for food, and not needing to go do other things. You're just totally lost interest in all worldly activities. So that there's a greatly sort of reduction of the desire, gross desires and anything. So the desire become non-desire. Of course, you will definitely feel elated by the experience, insofar as seeing the sign of some freedom from desire and their grip on you. Whether you have totally discarded them or not is another. But you are craving and longing and wanting, let alone become agitated from not getting those. They are remote. Now these things become a sort of you are completely over it, so to speak. Of course, there's amazing space. Spaciousness and freedom the mind is from suffering, because one doesn't have this grip of the desire over you, and there's amazing sense of contentment. The contentment. Usually, people think you become contented from getting more. No, getting more is not contentment. Getting more is suffering and cause of suffering. But becoming contented that you don't have what people are craving or coveting and desiring, totally sort of see the truth of. See the truth of see the Dharma knowledge of the truth of suffering and forbearance of the truth of suffering, but you have the subsequent knowledge of the truth of the suffering and the truth of the knowledge of the suffering. Because of that, the reduction or diminution of your desire and the replacement by contentment, of course, makes you feel very elated, very, very elated, and could be, it comes with certain emotion too, emotion of profound sadness for the world who doesn't have this, which doesn't have this. Maybe you might glimpse it, taste a little bit, but others don't. So sometimes practitioners reach certain great bouts of depression, if you like, but not out of affliction, but their genuine sadness for the world who don't see it, who are completely caught up in the whim of suffering and causing sufferings. No sign of abating or seeing and dropping and hindering, dropping any of the afflictions or habits. They're just so driven by this vicious cycle of what they have been so used to, and you become the witnesser of this melancholic nature of samsara. So this you can see how sometimes you can become ever crying bodhisattva. All you can do is cry. It's not that you are suffering yourself so much, but you can see how helplessly beings are fettered by their afflictions, and anything they do is like the silkworm. The more it produces the saliva, the more it gets it. So that's why, they get trapped and they eventually die. So you can see how every sentient being and the enormous confusion and how vulnerable, how unfree they are, how trapped they are. And that's the forbearance. The forbearance is you yourself are. It's not that you're not sort of tolerating the sufferings of the world, but sentient being suffering now becomes a overwhelming cause for you to develop these but natural compassion. Previously, we feel compassion to someone out of our attachment to them because who they are to us, and so on. And also we don't want to suffer, saying their sufferings. It's not like that. This kind of compassion is we're talking about how you develop wholesome emotions in the meditation. When you discard the afflictive emotions, the discarding means that you no longer have them. So now what do you have? If you have no affliction, what do you have? Instead of desire, you have contentment. You have contentment, but not saying, I'm perfect, I did my job, so good type of thing. Not that kind of wrong view kind of propped up contentment. Lots of the time our contentment is wrong view, but propped up contentment, saying, I'm so adequate, I'm so lucky, I got all things I need, I don't need to envy anybody, and that's kind of wrong view contentment. And this could be like a hermit who has only a begging bowl and a pair of robes, but his sense of contentment through his absence of desire. When you have absence of desire, it's naturally the aversion will be reduced. And you can see how all the fetters will now one after another, because those chains are only chained because they join together. When one chain is unchained, then it loosens every chain, and that's exactly what we call freedom. Freedom from the chains of karmic action. So depending to the how much one has transcended as a practitioner of which level of the Four Noble Truths, whether it's truth of sufferings, realization, abandonment of desire, or truth of suffering level of one, truth of origin is another, truth of cessation is another, truth of path is another, and then the truth of meditative state. Meditative state is fifth. This is now the kind of post path of seeing meditation, post path of seeing meditative state. And one actually transcends the desire due to that, and one transcended that. The transcending of the desirableness of oneself, and of course makes oneself natural progression to that of the realization of the truth of suffering of the form realm. And then goes to formless realm. So this is how desire realm beings, discarding of the desire and anger and so on of the Four Noble Truths, makes them to revisit the other other Four Noble Truths according to form realm and formless realm. And this is where the 15 moments are counted, because each of the three realms have 5 moments. Each of the 5 moments culminates to the 16th, which is the actual realization and discarding of all 98 root afflictions. But as you progress to the from lower moment to the higher moment, these 5 stages, the higher states have more subtle factors, such as attachment to the progression, to the lack of the desire realms for Noble Truth related problems, and the presence of the form realm related 5 moments. So there is excitement. So there's a lot of excitation, and there's a lot of sense of pridefulness. This is a kind of of course, from the normal point of view, it's not deluded pride, Say if you're very fit and healthy and you haven't been sick for years, you have good reason to think, I'm so lucky I'm healthy. So we don't call it wrong pride. It's quite, it's almost like a thankful pride. But here, that is not the kind of. But there is amazing excitement. Subtle excitement comes when you progress along those. The excitement is an affliction. But practitioners should not have excitement, nor should have a disappointment if you really reach the level. But those on the form realm, formless realm have lots of excitement and pride, and formless realm has their own form. Formless realm has their even their pride and excitation is just different. The higher formless realms excitation and pride is much more subtle than that. They have 2 types of attachment to their own entity or their own status for them, for instance. And they become very, very excited and prideful, and they become so mesmerized by their realization, and which is actually confusion of a subtle kind. So you can see unless one has the right view, right from the beginning, there's a very easy chance to grasp those excitation and subtle samadhi realization in the desire, form and formless realm. People stay in that kind of meditative jhanic state for long without realizing these are all transient and impermanent. So then there are what we call the secondary afflictions. Secondary afflictions are mental factors other than the root afflictions that are said to be the aggregates of formation or a secondary affliction. They are not called root affliction. They are secondary, and they are developed from the very result of getting rid of the gross afflictions. When we talk about secondary afflictions, such as enmity or jealousy or something, when we regard them as a secondary affliction rather than just hate, that's in a gross sense. But the secondary affliction, when we're referring to to those practitioners, it says those that they have to restrain are like there are as many as 24 secondary afflictions. Like they become very joyful. They become very, very joyful over this, but they don't know it's a secondary affliction. They're also yawning. The yawning. Yawning is an affliction. Mental lassitude, an affliction. Inability to digest food. Discernment for what is distinct. Lack of attention. Physical dysfunction. Hostility, abuse, stench, non-stench. All these kind of things happens. So this is quotation from another sutra chapter. This is why slowly they talk about the 84,000 affliction. If you talk about the root, gross 10, and then as you progress along the path, you have a much finer levels of afflictions that you become much more observant and cognizant of them as your practice grows, as your practice improves. These are, of course, all meditative state where you begin to discover this. So that's why this chapter presents a huge problem, even academically. For most people, it goes way over their head because these are not something we can understand unless you experience the discarding of the gross ones. Discarding of the gross ones not replaces. This means makes the subtle ones more manifest. When you haven't discarded the gross ones, you don't know even the gross ones exist. When the gross ones are recognized and identified and slowly identified and remedied, then the subtle one manifests. It's like you're washing the dirt, First you remove the gross dirt, and then slowly the subtle ones. First, for instance, when you have when you discard those gross affliction, first the gross affliction related body are discarded, and then the gross affliction related speech are discarded, then gross affliction related with the mind. So when you talk about discarding desire, you first discard the desire, these things you desire for the body, And when you have no desire for the things that you desire that are body, because you no longer desire body, because this body is undesirable, impure, and aggregates, you can physically never think of desiring or wanting, but mentally you still often every now and then think. So mental desires are not yet discarded, So you can see even just from the person who has given up something, so for whatever reason, maybe for health reasons or whatever, a self-improvement or reason or whatever, person has used to do this and that. Now he no longer drinks maybe say any liquor, Maybe occasionally some beers, but no longer any liquor. But previously he used to drink a liquor, Now he never drinks them, but he still every now and then he could drink. The mind still hasn't quite given up totally, but the body actually doesn't. Maybe the body doesn't desire anymore, doesn't need anymore. The mind still thinks about it. So you can see the desire is so subtle, and that's why often practitioners they talk about how a monastic practitioner must use must downcast his eyes when he walks. Not either on the right, not on the left, not far, but just couple of arrow length distant right in front, because your physical eye is not desiring to look at something. You're neither looking hither and neither there. So one must behave as you have only one thing, and that's to walk and get to the place you go. So that kind of behavior is considered to be like what practitioners should do as a member of monastic in order to tame the visual contact, and there's no visually craving to look, let alone to have eye contact. You don't even look at the object, desiring of the affection or attention or seeking of the love or whatever. You don't do that at all, because that's like you try to tame your visual kind of contact externally. Yeah, so that's physically. Of course, also then when it comes to verbal, even if when one engages in conversation, whether the conversation indulges into kind of a that actually leans onto passion or desire, and so then of course the language would be just very, very tamed, very, very proper. And now the physically and verbally, these are two social kind of way of restraining your body language and the verbal language. But how much of that is actually happening in the actual mind, as good as it is displayed outside, is completely anybody's guess. Why? Because it's much harder, subtler to actually contain desire, because we basically are even wanting to be seen as a pure is a desire. People say, "Oh, he's so good," and you want to be perceived by others that. so actually, you're desiring to be respectful. So of course, there is also a desiring something. Yeah. So when you attach to respect, they say if you're more attached to respect, if you're doing the outer behavior for the sake of attracting respect, then that's attachment already. So this almost like, now who will be able to spot that? And then, of course, a good practitioner would be cautious. Oh, I'm attached to respect. And so, and then those who are attached to, they go pseudo self-discipline. They're doing all the things, the nice things outwardly, but deep down they're really attached to how pure they need to be seen, or how favorable other people see you for. When one is attached to the image of oneself, rather than desiring something materially from outside. So even though you're not attached, but yet it's a worldly dharma. Your fame or respect is a worldly dharma. So, but you can, when you're a practitioner, you can see, this is very, very different, very, very fine different, like the classing the wolves, You can see, that's a different kinds of, they call that pseudo self-discipline. Pseudo self-discipline. But pseudoness of the self-discipline can only be recognized when you first tame your social behavior that is proper to the liking of others. Yeah. And the society is just as weak, and they really respect the one who behaves very well outwardly, because they can't tell anything and what's the color of the inside. They say the animal color stripe is outside, human stripe is inside. I mean, who can tell the nice stripe in your mind? So you can see the kind of a minor difference in the variations of the desire, how they can be controlled or not. And because everything is every of the gross afflictions are totally dependent on whether desire is discarded or not. If desire is not discarded, aversion will not, and pride will not, envy will not, and wrong view will not. And so therefore desiring beings are taught to curtail the desire by renunciation, by reducing the nearness to the objects, or the nearness to the object and causes and conditions, what we call renunciation. And so the distance from object to look, object to hear, object to smell or taste and touch, are all distance. So that's why the word monasticism in Buddhism was certain distance from more normal township, which is completely isolated place. He has to live in an isolated place that is far from the hustle bustle, but where there is no proximity of interaction to the common folks. And Tibetan word gompa means solitude. Gompa actually means solitude, doesn't mean temple. Means so solitude, that should be far away. Why? Is because out of sight, out of mind. So when you're not near the object, you can't desire an object you don't see. You can, but imagine you can do the mind, mental thing. But because then the chances of arousing of desire is reduced because of the lack of object, lack of contact with the object. And so the inappropriate attention can still be a problem. You could be far distance, but still you could be craving and desiring something. But then it is your mind, even though the thing is nowhere near for you to be able to acquire, because of the trouble and the difficulty for you to acquire it. Secondly, then is it worth getting it? Then the very thing that you're trying to get is unsatisfactory, and the effort that you have to get is even more unsatisfactory. Because of these things, they create all kinds of inconveniences for oneself to entertain the craving and desire. And not by mere abstention, but by understanding of their futility and of their unsatisfactoriness, of their impurity, of their impermanence and lack of anything there. So because of that, the mind is therefore dropping the desire by distancing. That they call disassociation practice. Disassociation practice is mainly, it's like a form of fasting, you know. If you're with the food, you do fasting, and with everything else, you just minimize. You just minimize your need of everything, your interaction. Because of the minimization of that, then the disassociation practice has enabled you to associate with appropriate attention. Then you are freed from those negative association, and you are therefore free. You have time, you have energy that can now pay to the appropriate attention. See, therefore, all the positive emotions are cultivated by practice of renunciation of the objects or sensory object. We can call sensory objects, whatever the object is, from sight to tactile. When one is able to practice this, you can see that's why how very strong how Buddhism, I don't know, other tradition, Buddhism in the really old days and maybe even today is identified with monasticism. People always expect the Dharma practitioner to be monastics, because that was almost like you have to be monastic to practice, otherwise it's almost impossible to practice. And this was how it was advocated, how it was taught, and even you can see when a person practices, he need to discard the desire and hatred and so on. Without that, there is no even path of no development of any degree of enlightenment. And then, of course, when the wisdom teaching has been brought in more than the method teachings, because the method teaching is the more conduct orientated. When the wisdom teaching is orientated more like emptiness and correct view teachings, then that's right. It sees the fallacy or danger or trap of thinking that you are pure because you abstain few things, But externally you abstain few things, but deep down you are completely attached to your status, to your name, to the respect, and so therefore that is considered to be a real trap. And of course, society doesn't know that level. But for the practitioners, the one who is doing all of those externally disassociation technique practices, but deep down there is no awareness to recognize the subtle afflictions of attachment to the status and how pure or how perfect or how ideal and how better my conduct is than his or her. That's exactly when we look at the five afflicted views, superiority over my conduct is the one of the worst afflictions. And quite a lot of people are stuck in that. And that's why even those inter-religious schools are all about that. Ours is the only way. Theirs is the wrong one. They always say that. And so you can see how everybody is trapped into their wrong views without realizing they are wrong views. And Dharma teachings is saying that unless we have merit, and faith and refuge and in the triple gem and so on, any practitioner, even Dharma practitioners, can easily fall into those traps, when they don't have the merit. So therefore, path of accumulation, path of preparations are very important. Otherwise, people try to smart themselves to do meditate, to realize something, and think they have realized the view, or they have reached somewhere that nobody can relate to. So their kind of pseudo spiritual realization can make people feel themselves very high and elated in these things. This is why this particular chapter talks about so many subtle traps that the practitioner in the form and formless realms have to. Not form and formless realm beings themselves don't think they have a problem, but the Mahayana teachings and Theravada teachings too, I would imagine, or warn practitioners falling into this 9 worldly samadhis. The 9 worldly samadhi is the desire realm samadhi. The form realms got 4 samadhis, 4 meditative state, and formless realms 4 other meditations. What they call infinite sky, infinite consciousness, nothing whatsoever, peak of existence. So these are 9 worldly meditative state. 9 worldly meditative state are basically 9 worldly traps. And if one doesn't have heard the right view teaching on emptiness and have not accumulated merit sufficiently by doing the preliminary practices, most of the practitioners, however good their meditations are, they have a more likelihood of falling into the trap. Buddha's his own teacher, the Rudraka is one of the name. Both of their realization were they were stuck into the worldly meditation of the 4 formless realm meditations, and he could actually see them. He could see the trapness of how one can fall into them, and not even realize you need to be rescued. This is why the various categories of defilements are mentioned, and they all which of them arise, which of them manifests, which of them fades away. It's not like that because subtle afflictions don't manifest until to those who have discarded the gross ones. Once the gross ones are eradicated, then the subtle ones become more manifest, and then those of the afflictions on the desire realm is eradicated. Then the afflictions of the form realm become more manifest. We already thought we got rid of desire of the desire realm, but even though you have gone through the first 5 stages of the desire realm, but you have yet to reckon with the 5 levels of the suffering of truth in relation to the form realm, and then in relation to the desire, formless realm, and so on and so forth. So that's why those charts that we offered a few weeks ago, that Steve has helped to put together, is very, very important. But we can't really understand them on the best as level as we could, because we don't have the subjective experience of this. So I'm just thinking, how do this monastic textbook like this is taught to young boys who have no actual meditative experiences? This will completely go over everybody's head, and it's going over the head even now. I'm myself thinking like that. So, but it is an important topic because it is the truth of origin of suffering. We're talking about this whole unit is truth of the origin of suffering. It's the second noble truth. Second noble truth is the truth of origin, which is the afflictions and craving and all the secondary afflictions that is the cause of samsara. If you don't recognize the true origin, however difficult it is to fathom all the detail, but at least if we recognize the weight of the problem, the burdenness of the problem, the 10 afflictions are. Those 10 afflictions are. If you recognize the 10 afflictions, particularly distinguishing the 5 non-view afflictions, which is desire, anger, pride, ignorance, and doubt, and then the 5 others who are afflicted views in relation to grasping to the aggregate as self. So that's, most people wouldn't even call that afflictions, And the extreme view and the wrong view, and then grasping to false view as supreme. Saying that our way is the only way. There's no other way. There's only one way. That is our way. And that's usually most religious proponents blatantly say that. and Buddhist teaching also say that, In the doctrinal teachings, Buddhists also say that, ours is best. They don't. When you look at it, it's one of the wrong views. So even the best one is maybe best, but if once you try to develop grasping to that as a more superior one, it is the wrong view. And then grasping to false kind of discipline that one practices. Maybe people do asceticism, fasting, or whatever strict vows they preserve. They think this is the only way. And unless you do this, you got no chance. And quite a lot of that, like that, when we talk about, even in Buddhism, there's full of that, saying that only man can attain enlightenment. That kind of teaching is such a, it definitely fits this wrong view. Only Mahayana can enlightenment. The others are not. All this kind of way of saying is leaning to that wrong view, because one is superior over everything. But of course, because people have no danger of realizing them, they don't even know it's a big problem, big blatant kind of expression of wrong view. Most people don't know that. So these 10, we can call it 10 fundamental views. Usually, some people call it 6 wrong views, 6 sort of afflictions, and then the 6th one is subdivided into 4. Then that makes 10. So that's a different way of classifying them, yeah? They usually call 6 root defilements, 22 secondary defilements, and then when the 6 root defilements are then the ignorance is subdivided into another 5, then that makes the 5 afflicted views. But here in the Abhidharma, it doesn't talk like that. It distinguishes afflictive views and cognitive views. Cognitives are afflicted views, and the deluded view, the non-view afflictions are gross 5 cardinal afflictions. And the subtle variations between them are enormous. But it's only when they talk about the individuals and meditations and realizations on the 6th chapter, then they detail these things, how the individual practitioners meditate, and each individuals are named according to their level of realizations. From the, in the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas in the Theravada tradition. And so that's called Theravada lineage. And then within the Mahayana, they subdivide into the 4 schools, four philosophical schools, because each of those schools are philosophically differs a lot in terms of what afflictions need to be discarded and when and so on. So that becomes even more complicated, because you have to go into the various 4 schools of thoughts. And of the 4 schools of thoughts, first 2 are the Theravadan schools, the Sautantrikas and Vaibhashikas. The Vaibhashikas are particularist. school, and Sautantrikas are mainly literalists. They are literalists in the sense they have to see our text that's taught by the Buddha, otherwise they wouldn't touch it. They are literalists, and that's why Theravadins are very staunch. They don't want touch texts that are not Pali, and they think the Pali Buddhist canon is the only one. The others are not. They're actually being very loyal to the South Tantrika school. South Tantrika school actually are like that. And they definitely say the Mahayana was not taught by the Buddha. And therefore, so you can see the inter-Buddhist, the schools already got very, 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 very heavy argument. And they said that Nagarjuna did not even exist, let alone. So that I went to Nalanda University in India. We had a seminar with some of scholars there, and when we were talking about Nagarjuna, they were shaking heads. They say, "You guys are wasting your time reading the book." So incredible kind of views they hold, because they and so the Nalanda University, which is famous being the seat of Nalanda scholars, which supposedly Nagarjuna is the people who are in Nalanda University doesn't want to know him. They go way before Nagarjuna. They go way before, so that their scholars and authors, compilers of the Buddhist literatures are very, very venerable arhats. There's no dispute there, but they have very little room for all these Mahayana scholars. They don't even want to accept them historically ever existed at that time. Quite interesting. And then, of course, as a result of that, even some of the historical Buddhist places you go, there is a Theravadan version of the story where Buddha actually did the 6-year retreat, and the Mahayanas have another place, because everybody goes to many holy spots depending who follows who, So that clearly shows why this kind of literature. Because when Vasubandhu wrote this, he was a Theravadan. This is all Theravadan literature. We are not reading Mahayan. This is not Mahayana literature. This is not the Abhidharma is not regarded as a separate text of. But his brother who wrote the Abhidharma Samuchaya, we call higher Abhidharma, and this is lower Abhidharma, because this is lower Abhidharma, because this is written by mainly by Beshika Vasubandhu. Vasubandhu, who is a particularist. And of course, this kind of school of thought exists even between two brothers. Of course, later on they say, Vasubandhu actually became a celebrated Mahayan literature, and he probably didn't want to rewrite this book, but he should have, I think. So when you look at the Abhidharmakosha, it's not an original work. There are almost like 28 the sutras that Buddha taught on this. So therefore, these are actually all the Abhidharma Dharma texts written by Vasubandhu and his brother Asanga. The wording and concepts are completely identical with many things that is Abhidharma. I had a brief look at the Abhidharma text of Theravadan tradition. They talk about 52 mental factors. They talk of 52 mental factors. And most of them are completely identical, but they don't classify those 52 mental factors as according to the Abhidharma text. Abhidharma text, they don't categorize as Asanga and Vasubandhu brothers do. So you can see this kind of text has a huge history. And even though it's written in 5th century AD, but 5th century AD is 900 years after Buddha passed away. But Buddha is the one who taught taught all of this. But Tibetan Buddhists, Mahayanists, actually champion as if people like Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu are the authors of Abhidharma and Madhyamika, and almost relegating Buddha's original teachings, almost like too sacred to read, leave it up there in the shrine, and read these ones instead. So actually this has happened, This has happened because time of the Nagarjuna, and particularly of the Vasubandhu, is 900 years after Buddha passed away. And it's interesting thing is why he has to write a book, mnemonic, really textbook like this. It's because there was danger of forgetting. And there were not a lot of literature. There were not a lot of publication. There's hardly any publication. If there was only one or two copies, they're all written on palm leaves. But someone like him who has studied so, I would say, so diligently, and he comprehended all, and then his vision to write this in this mnemonic textbook was so that these teachings are not lost. So the intention with which he wrote is quite amazing, and the wording he uses, very, very kind of cryptic way of preserving the teachings, but very, very difficult, even with a commentary, to know exactly what is going on. It wouldn't be easy to be used in any modern textbook because of its denseness. I met someone, she read this book, she says, gave her a headache. gave her a headache. Instead of understanding it, it just gave her a headache. And because this textbook is so old, and commentaries for this in Tibet, written in probably 16th century. And this translation is a commentary of the 16th century Tibetan commentary. Which actually relies heavily on the existing Indian commentaries, because Tibetans have translated all the Indian commentaries, which are all in the canons. So you're talking about that. Now, when talking about this, I wanted to tell you that His Holiness Dalai Lama has launched a particular project to write these Buddhist textbooks as a kind of textbooks. He is selected a good team, good team of maybe 30 geishas and a few Western scholars and translators, and they are starting to produce some books which are a lot more easier than this kind of old textbooks. And they produced two books already. So watch out. And and the second book is definitely touches a lot on these things, but they come from different angle. So anyway, what I'm saying here tonight is that when the different categories of the what they call taxonomy of the afflictions are discussed, they're talking about the typology of the afflictions, not that we could share or understand, but the difference between afflictions of the desire realm practitioners and the desire realm who realize the Four Noble Truths. Each of the Noble Truth realization have different kind of discarding of the afflictions doing. Even discarding of the desire level on the truth of suffering level, truth of origin level, truth of path level, truth of system is totally different, So the first one is truth of suffering level. Of course, truth of suffering level, you firstly take caution. Take caution from desiring pleasurable objects or pleasurable things. So try to exercise restraint, and maybe even renounce. Renounce as with aversion, basically, because you can't desire. If you don't want to desire, you have to practice aversion. So you have to practice aversion to the desirable object, isn't it? And which is the suffering, really. Which is suffering. You can't eradicate suffering with suffering, but that's the only way. You recognize one big suffering by experiencing small suffering. Small suffering is aversion, Small suffering is aversion. But small suffering is having to restrain it, but big suffering is you avoiding the actual desiring the undesirable. So big suffering is eradicated, while small suffering is tolerated. Yeah, that's the forbearance. Forbearance with the truth of suffering. Forbearance with the truth of suffering. And then you know the Dharma of suffering, knowledge of the suffering, prevalence of the suffering. Then your knowledge of the suffering makes you not suffer the forbearance miserably, but experience the forbearance with understanding. Yeah. So therefore, knowledge with the forbearance on the truth of the path, on the truth of suffering, is better than just mere forbearance to restrain from desiring. And then you progress from that. Then the truth of origin. Then the truth of origin. When you have the truth of origin, you also go through the four. Knowledge, forbearance, subsequent knowledge, subsequent forbearance. So those four. Each of the four are repeated. Yeah, incredible, really. But unless you really think carefully and thoughtfully and meditate, you wouldn't know how to distinguish even within the within the truth of suffering, let alone between the truth of origin and truth of cessation, truth of path, let alone truth of suffering of desire realm to truth of suffering of the formless realm. You see, so that's why it talks about the taxonomy of the afflictions, because the different levels of the realization and reveals much more subtle versions of the same to the practitioner's level of the progress. And this is what makes the graduation. So that's why those 15 categories of noble truths are 5 for each of the 3 realms, and they are not identical. Remember, the words are identical. The things that are discarded are named identical, but the typology of the fine difference between these, what is discarded, which levels, are totally different. And that's only I can read from this textbook, which is quite an incredible opening. Because otherwise you say, you discard 98, afflictions, but you don't. You only if you realize the truth of suffering, you only discard 10 gross afflictions. These 10 gross afflictions, for one who practices truth of suffering, but when he moves to the truth of origin, he has to discard another 7. Another 7 are, except 3, all 7 are same. So what we're talking about is not the same desire, but another different level of desire, and so on. It's incredible how Vasubandu wrote this as a mnemonic textbook. He talks about you discard 10, 7, 7, 8, 4. For instance, that's what he says. And so that's why how dense the text is without the commentary is incredible. Even with the commentary, you have to read so many times. When I read the English translation, I get headache too. You know? When I look at Tibetan one, it helps a little bit, But Tibetan ones are not paragraphed. English translation is this paragraph, the quotations and paragraph. In Tibetan, no paragraph, no quotation mark. It's all just hardly any space between that. So, but of course you can, because the language in which I read isn't Tibetan. But English, this Ian's English version is very difficult because the terminologies are still unstandardized in Buddhism. Like he uses the perseverance for forbearance, and that threw me. and there was a Canadian monk. He's a Kempo in Kagyu tradition, and he was teaching not this text, but a text, another commentary, and he was saying the same thing. He read Ian's translation, and he says he can't agree with most of the terms he used, even though most of the meanings are there. The technical terms he used, like he uses the perseverance for forbearance. Like perseverance looks like a more diligence to me, Of course, in English, perseverance could be patience. Is it? Patience? Yeah, perseverance. You can use it. Patience.
Yeah. Keep going.
Keep going. Yeah, keep going. Not tolerating the hardships.
Maybe you persevere. You keep going despite.
Yeah. So I think in English you could, but that's the whole thing. This kind of text, terminology are not standardized, and so even when I read in English, I say, "What the hell is this all about?" And then I have to find the Tibetan, and they say, "Oh gosh, what would be my translation like? It would be even worse." That's what I haven't attempted. There's a reading someone's translation is like chewing a sugar cane that someone has already chewed it. So if you have the benefit of reading the original language, that's what you can tell the distinction. But when you don't know the original language, of course you may not feel that. Anyway, I'm still recommending you to get this headache book. This just is one of the small chapters, Anyway, thank you. You're persevering very well. You're persevering and forbearing very well in going through this text. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Whatever slight merit there is in our listening and being here with everyone, we rejoice that incredible friendship of the Dharma that we have, and therefore, it's very good that we can at least spend some few hours each week like this. Is a good purpose of being alive and feeding and washing and drinking. Because we can do other things too that are useful, and at least we know that afflictions are such a problematic, such a yoke that we couldn't lift our neck up when it is suppressing us. And it is what hinders your friendship with others. It is which hinders us from not being able to sleep well, or becoming depressed, or sad, or lonely, or hurt. It's because we don't know how to undo the afflictions. We are doing the afflictions repeatedly, erroneously, and so any gleaning and reading from this will enable us to have the cognizance as how to practice what do we call disassociation technique. How do you have an appropriate attention that can distance the proximity of being mauled or being harmed by the afflictions, by your mindfulness to spot them and then and sort of isolate them by developing constructive, wholesome emotions. And for instance, just reading and listening like this, we are able to distract from other worries and anxieties, some burning issues in your life. Yes, when you do this. And the more we are able to do that, the more able we are not to pay inappropriate attention to those subjects and situations that are deludedly unable to recognize how deluded they are. So that's why active listening to Dharma and reading is very wholesome indeed, because it will slowly increase our ability to develop appropriate attention and avoid paying attention to inappropriate subjects and objects and issues that otherwise tend to hijack us. And that's the teaching. That is the teaching. So for that we'll do the dedication. Thank you, everyone. Oceana Pada Sinede Hereda Mahayana Dije Adeva Mereda Hevagra Mehobe Begas de Levas Tehoda Mahayana Dije Courage Manjuju Nuvode Azama Dabadra de Lava Waloe Ahade Zamba Ashade Dege de Mere Mere Zelembo Dijida Tebe where has been bombed angry freely without the title of the book is called Any Effort But Tribe That. It straight away jumps at you. Commentary on Vasubandu's Abhidharmakosha. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche.